how to concise and put things, which is very important. So a little bit confused I was.
It's really difficult to keep things concise. It's much easier to write lots, quite frankly. So when I was vibrant tabloid newspaper press in the UK, and in the tabloid press people write journalists actually to be a tabloid newspaper as opposed to one of the bigger newspapers like the Times, for example. It was much harder to write for the tabloids because you have to write in a much more concise and punchy way. Now, there's lots of pros and cons for working for the tabloids, so we won't go into that. But you're absolutely right. To write in a very concise way is very difficult, and it takes quite a lot of practice, I would say, to get it right. I think it'd be good if we can look at some examples of some op-eds, and then we could talk through some of the key challenges and some of the must-do activities to keep them on message. Aditi, would you like to add anything at this point?
Just on the concise writing, because that's the question that keeps coming up even when I go to my TTs. It is difficult for Indians to actually do summary writing. You know, we are not very good in school also. We don't get very good marks in summary writing. So I think there are some techniques and tools that you need to be using to make sure that you write concisely. One of the main things that you have to remember, and I'm repeating, with the media is that one piece of writing needs to give only 1 or 2 outputs, not more than that, just 1 or 2 messages, and even within that outputs, just 1 or 2 things that you want to say. That's it, not more than that. Secondly, the other technique, so first you have to decide, okay, what is it that I want to tell them, and you just put that down in 1 sentence or maximum 2 sentences, preferably just 1 sentence. The second thing to do is to put down 3 points to explain that sentence, and that's it. If you just expand those 3 points and the final message that you have to give, or 2 messages, that's all that you have to do, and I don't think you'll go beyond 800 words if you just limit yourself to that. And when you're training for concise writing, then there are some of these tools which you can use. But right now, I can just leave you with these 2 tools. That A, just be clear on what is the message that you want to give. Just 1 message to begin with, maximum 2 in 1 sentence. And then 3 points to explain those messages. That's it. And then you should...
They're good tips, very good tips. Aditi's right. Getting 1 or 2 messages across clearly is far more important than telling the world every detail of the research. It really is just thinking of boiling something down so that you can see what's the basis of it, what's the key message that you want to look at. A couple of examples of op-eds just so that it can be clear what we're talking about. Go on to the one after. So if we just go past this one for a second, and let's just, if we click on the bottom link there, so if you'd like to go back one, sorry, and we click on the link just there. I've just included some examples here of some good examples of op-eds that I know because they're based on bits of research that have come through IDRC at some point. And as this opens, I think what's interesting when you look at the op-ed pieces is that once upon a time opinion pieces in newspapers might have their own sections in the newspapers. With online writing, they still quite often will have their own sections on the website, but sometimes they will come up in the blog sections of a site now. Because there's a lot of crossover, I think, with writing opinion pieces and writing blogs. It tends to be the format of them that changes slightly. If we look at just this example here, this piece was in the Guardian newspaper in the UK, and what I think is interesting about this opinion piece, you'll notice straight off that it has quite a striking headline there. It's quite short, where it says managing local conflict is vital to peacekeeping but needs care and continuity, which international bodies often lack. You see straight away the viewpoint that this piece is going to come from. The point is very clearly made. And then if you look at the actual text underneath it, the main meat, if you like, of the op-ed, you can see it's written in very short, very punchy paragraphs. And I'll give you a chance, obviously, afterwards to read through these pieces, but the speaker's viewpoint comes through really quite clearly and quite concisely. The beauty of writing op-eds that appear online, of course, is that you can embed links to perhaps longer pieces of evidence. And that's really fantastic. If you're doing it in print, obviously it's far difficult to take people off and read longer pieces. So you have to make sure the points that you're making are really, really quite clear and concise. When you look through this piece, you'll see that it's got quite a limited word count. And knowing the length of the op-ed piece is really important. It's really important before you even submit your opinion piece to have a sense of where it's going to appear, which publications are you going to actually write this for, and how much space can they afford you, what is their word count. The reason why I say that is that it'll help you to really focus on the message that you want to put across, but also with opinion pieces, speaking as somebody who has edited these pieces in the past, it's really difficult as an editor to make the right cuts and to still get the message across. So if you know the word count in advance and you know the length of the piece that you should be writing, you can get your message across without somebody playing around with your words too much, and that's quite important. If you look towards the bottom of this opinion piece, if we can just scroll down, you'll see that the opinion piece, whoops, before we get to the adverts, if we just stop there, we'll see that the opinion piece usually ends with the clear point. So it comes to international peacekeeping will only be effective when it gives priority to continuity and engagement. We're ending with a very clear, this is the point that I want to get across. And it's very clear here who's speaking. It clearly would say here it's Professor David Leonard, and why, what are his qualifications to speaking to this. So what I would say is keep it short, keep it on message, keep it very clear, and make sure that it ends with a very clear point, so that this is the piece that people take away with them. If they only remember one thing about your piece, this is the point that you want it to make. So if we can go back to the slides for a second, Siobhan, we can just go through some of the top tips for op-eds in more detail. So if we can just skip back, here we go. I've pulled together a little list, and I shared this with Aditi over the last few days, of just top tips for you to remember with an op-ed. Remember, op-eds are opinion pieces, so they're putting a message across, but as we've tried to reinforce here, it's really important to be clear, concise, and topical. If your opinion piece is chiming with something that's going on in the world at that point, you're much more likely to have the opinion piece published, because it's something that will be on people's minds, and you would be presenting an informed viewpoint on a subject which people see is important at that time. It's very important when you're writing your opinion piece to avoid jargon, assumed language. Research is full of acronyms, and you shouldn't assume that people will know what they mean. And if they're reading this opinion piece while they're eating their breakfast, they're not going to want to go looking things up. They just want to, to have a good read, basically. Making it relevant, as I say, making it topical and relevant really helps to get pieces published. If it can fit in with something that's going on in the world at that time, or an event, then you're much more likely to get your message across. It's really important when you're thinking about making it relevant to take into account local data and culture, to make sure that you're using examples that are relevant to the community. So if you think about the publication where you're going to be putting your op-ed, and you're thinking about who the readership is, you can use examples which would speak much more to that audience. I think it's fair to say, and hopefully it comes through, that if you're presenting an opinion piece, you need to speak not only clearly but with some authority. You know, you need to have a viewpoint. If it's a bit kind of wishy-washy, sits on the fence, then it's unlikely to be published. It needs to have a very clear, very defined view. When we think about the length, we've touched on it slightly just looking at that example. The length of the piece, if you're aware of word count limitations, and perhaps you might want to contact the publisher, the newspaper or the website in advance to find out how long the opinion pieces are, it will make for a much better read. You might have to write your opinion piece several times to get it to that word length and to cut it. I would suggest, if you are writing it several times, that you read it several times, and reading your opinion piece out loud to yourself before you submit it is a really good tip. Just to make sure that it really does sound right, and that you haven't put too many big confusing words in, or lots of acronyms, or you know, you've just filled it up with lots of jargon. So with the length of it, if you read it out to yourself and try to make sure that it fits within the word count, I think, I mean, Aditi, it'd be good to hear from you at this point. Certainly from my view as a UK journalist, maximum for an op-ed piece in the UK would be around 700 words. I think, Aditi, you would suggest that actually perhaps it's usually a little bit higher than that, around 800 to 1200, would that be right? Oh, have we got Aditi? Aditi, if you're thinking about word counts for op-eds, would you say it's slightly higher, around 800 words?
Hi, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. So here it's usually up to 1,000 words. So, you know, well, the Hindu carries slightly longer versions. And the Hindu is also more, the Hindu is a newspaper, daily newspaper here. It is also more likely to carry articles on the kind of work that the TTs do. So they would carry up to 1,200 words. But generally it's good to keep it between 800 and 1,000 words.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you know, you just need to, you just need to make sure where you're sending it, because say the Times of India could maybe go in for 750 words, Hindu for 1,200, the Hindustan Times maybe for about 900 or so. So the roughly it should be about 800 to 1,000 words, and then you can subtract or add depending on which paper you're sending it to.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a good point. It's a really good point. Thank you for that. I think the other thing to mention on here is to think about the tone of your piece. Opinion pieces, they should be passionate but not emotional. It's a really difficult balance to get right. You want it to be respectful in tone. You don't want it to come across as a rant. You could look at different formats. If you really want to rant at something, you could look at, say, letters to the editor. Sometimes are quite a good chance for a rant. But in opinion pieces, what you're trying to get across is that you have a voice of authority, that it's coming from a background of understanding this topic really well. And if you start to rant and be too emotional about a piece, then sometimes that message doesn't come across very clearly. So really think about the tone of the piece when you're writing it and choose the words carefully. When you sign off the piece, and in that piece that we looked at just a moment ago, it clearly stated at the end that it was written by a particular professor, and it said the organisation from where he came. Opinion pieces tend to be taken more seriously if they are signed by a known individual in the community, or they're signed by someone with a position or a job title that's recognised. It gives a bit of weight, it gives a bit of understanding as to, well, why does this person have an opinion, what background do they have, and a bit of kind of validity, if you like. Having said that, some of the best opinion pieces can be written by young, talented researchers who are passionate about their research. So perhaps perhaps their job title isn't the top of the organisation, but they know their research very well and they speak very much from the heart. So I think it's choosing the right messenger, making sure that that you're clear about who is speaking to the piece and where they come from, which organisation they come from, perhaps, or what background they have to inform the piece. There's some kind of technical bits as well that you need to think about, not just in terms of writing the piece, but also when you go to submit an article. When you submit your article, if you're sending it by email, I would say the best way to do it is to cut and paste that text into the body of an email. Quite often journalists will receive lots and lots of emails, and if they've got attachments on them, they won't necessarily open them from unknown sources, just because they're not sure if it's going to contain, viruses, or if they're going to be big files that they're going to have to download to their computers. So when you're sending your article in, find out, as we said before, which publication you're sending it to. If you can find out who to send it to within that organisation, that's really good. Then you're sending it directly to the right desk, if you like, the person who's got interest to it. And if you cut and paste it into the body rather than sending it as an attachment, then you've got more chance of people actually opening it. Most organisations will respond to emails. There's not many organisations that really you need to send it through in a printed format anymore. Most would take it on emails, but it's good to find out in advance the best way to send it to particular organisations. When you are writing your piece and you're thinking about the tone and you're thinking about the message that you want to get across, it's good to do your homework. It's good to read around your subject area. Even though you might technically know information about the research, it's really good to look at other opinion pieces, perhaps from different newspapers, to try and understand different perspectives that are coming in, and that would really help you to write your own pieces. It's good sometimes to think about the style that the paper has, and think about how that can be written, because you've got more chance of it being accepted if it's written in a style and a tone that's akin with the rest of the newspaper. There is a chance on opinion pieces that they might get sent back to you. So the editor might say, I really like this piece, but I don't quite understand the point that you're making here. Is there another way that you could make it? So you might get into a situation where you make revisions working with the journalist or with the editor for that publication, and that's a good position to be in, because it can help you to just really make the piece really clear. And finally, on the op-ed pieces, we put down here, never get dejected, because I think most organisations get a lot of material sent to them, and you might get lots of rejections, but some of the world's greatest authors got rejected several times before they finally got published. So try to change the piece if it does get rejected, and perhaps think about a different newspaper or a different website that you went to send it to. Think, if you do get it rejected, have I really made it the points clear? As we said before, you should have that maximum of 1 to 2 clear messages in the article, that it should be free from jargon, that it should be really coherently written in a very clear and accessible way, that it fits the word count. It may have just got rejected because it's too long, and that does happen in a rushed and busy news environment. And it's good to just look at the text when you're sending it in the body of the email. Silly little things really make a difference. If you've written it in a nice big font so that it's really clear for people to actually read it, rather than a tiny 0.8 font size, then you've got more chance in a newsroom or in a media environment where they're getting lots of information in. It's just about accessibility. If people can see it quickly and understand it quickly, they're more likely to use that piece. So there are kind of top tips to take away, and I'll send around some notes afterwards with a bit more detail on these bullet points so that you can remember when you come to write your own op-ed pieces. Before we move on to look at press releases, does anybody have any questions or any reflections that they'd like to make at this point? Does it make sense?
This is Susan. Yeah. Okay. Can I ask a question, Kelly?
Of course, Susan, please.
You know, I was looking at the Guardian piece, and the second line just before the main article starts, it says something about managing conflict locally, etc. And I'm trying to look at it often from a reader's perspective, and what I find is that if the article is saying something that is saying more of the same, there is a tendency for me as a reader not to engage with the article. And often what I find useful is if it is if it starts with a strong insight, then I find that as a reader I tend to engage. That's one point, and I am just sort of sharing that as a reflection. And my second point is that I think it's therefore useful, and I think you just mentioned this, but it's useful to know what is the public discourse around this subject at a given point in time, and therefore is it useful to actually curate your article to consider some of these public perspectives and the ongoing discourse, which will then somehow engage the reader. Engage the reader. And the second point is therefore for me that media, their print media and newspapers should be combined with other channels.
So don't just rely on one format when you're...
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's really useful to think, before you even put pen to paper, to think about who do I want to reach with this information, and what kind of forms of media are those groups of people likely to access. You know, we talk quite a lot now about writing for an online audience, but I know that, you know, a lot of people, perhaps when they're travelling to work or are out and about, still very much have a newspaper, you know, in their pocket, because it's easy, it's accessible. You know, it's really thinking about how to reach the audience that you want and what's the best media to reach them. I think you're absolutely right as well about thinking about the opening paragraphs, those first few sentences, really getting the point across very clearly in them and making sure that they are relevant and what is the conversation that's going on around that topic at the moment. You're much more likely to have a piece published if it chimes with something that's happening in the world at that time. Did anybody else have any further points to make on those pieces? Should we move on to press releases? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Yes, Kelly, we can.
Lovely.
I hope
Okay.
so.
So if we move on to press releases, as I was saying at the beginning, press releases are slightly different from op-eds or opinion pieces. You'll see lots of similarity when we come through to the top tips, because clearly they need to be written in a very clear way. But the actual format for writing them is slightly different. Press releases are very much written as short, factual pieces, and they're really good tools for announcing activities, for announcing either events or activities that are happening, or new research outputs that are newsworthy. So again, we have the situation where it's important that what you're announcing chimes with the world, if you like. If it fits into something that's already happening within the world, then it's you know, it needs to be timely. Editors do receive hundreds of press releases, and it's really important that you make them clear and engaging if you want them to be read. many years ago, I used to work for a publication called BBC English Magazine. It was a publication for people learning English around the world. And I used to get sent hundreds of press releases, usually telling me about a new textbook that was being published. And quite frankly, unless there was something really outstanding in that press release, I got so many of them that I found it really difficult to choose the ones that I would feature in the publication. So it sounds terrible in a way, but if the press release came and it was very clear, perhaps it had some pictures with it, perhaps had a nice title to it, it was very accessible to read, I was much more likely to review that textbook in the publication than I would have been if it was a dry press release that was in a very small font and didn't look very appealing. If we move on and have a look at some examples here, I think it will help us to understand a bit more what needs to be contained in a press release. I've taken a screen grab here of a press release that I found online, and I thought perhaps we would just look at it for a moment before we go on to discuss the top tips, and perhaps we could just have a look at it, and perhaps people could just tell me what they think of it, whether they think it works, whether they think it is a good example of a press release, and if not, why is it not a good example? What do people think? Does it?
If I may, it's a very technical piece. I mean, unless the readers are acquainted with the technicalities that have been mentioned, it's Greek and Latin.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, I mean, is this for a newspaper or for a science journal?
I think it was actually sent to a newspaper, but you're right, it looks like a lot of assumed knowledge, doesn't it? That you would think it was going to a science journal.
So obviously the abstract has been copy pasted. If you read the first and the last lines only, you will realize that the abstract has been copy pasted. This is not a press release at all.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right in that it's been cut and pasted from a wider document. Yeah. And look at all those names at the top as well. There's lots and lots of them. So I get the sense that, oh, this is important. These are intelligent people. Are they? I don't know. Guessing. You know what I mean? I don't know what all these names are or where they come from.
I'm sorry. I'm a copy editor, and I looked at it and I realized that it's been. I mean, this is exactly the way you would cite an article. You see, there's a document object identifier there. At the end, there's a link to download a PDF. So this is exactly how you would send a citation for your own article to, let's say, a conference organizer or a journal publisher, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. It's an abstract, isn't it?
Kelly.
Yeah.
No, I'm not asking regarding this piece of, in press release there can be 10 information. So, the press release can have a 10 information or 20 information. So it should be in, different format, what I see and felt that. It may be 5 best information, but if I put the Aditi's point, you should not say 5 things one time. In one time, you should say 5 things 5 times, different, 1 point one time, second point in second time. So I don't know, a little bit confused. So can you clarify on this?
So am I right in you're thinking about how many, in a press release format or in an op-ed format?
No, press release format, how many information, we can give. Because
Yep.
here, there are many information they have given.
Yeah, lots and lots of information. With a press release,
Yeah.
it's usually very good to focus again on one or two key messages. Keep it really concise and really clear. If you can make one point really well, then that's the best way to do it, to be honest. But one or 2 points. So, for example, you might send out a press release to announce the launch of a piece of research, and maybe it's an event. Perhaps that's what you're holding an event, and it's going to launch that piece of research. So there, you've got 2 key points that you would want to get across. You would want to get across that you're actually holding an event and what are the details of the event, but also what are you launching at that event? What's the research hook that you're promoting at that event? But you're right, you want to keep it just on message. 1 or 2 messages, I think, would be good. Aditi, would you like to add to that?
Just to say that why we say it's only one message or 2 messages is for very practical reasons. Actually, we say maximum 3 messages, and the reason for that is that the space that the media person has is very limited. Whether you're talking about print journalism, there are stories which are 150 words at times. If it's a front page story, it's just 3 paragraphs. 100. The idea is that if we can give just 1 or 2 points in one story,
I'm not getting your voice.
I think you've dropped off there, Aditi.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just saying that it's practical to be short in messages because the print person or the TV person has very limited space, right? So maybe, a minute is a long time on television, so you might just get 20 seconds, 15 seconds. And on print media too, sometimes if it's an important story, it's just 150 words on the front page. And that is why it's practical to be short and clear. And it also means that then, you have enough ammunition to give for stories out of one research. Why do you want to waste a research which is, in which you put maybe 2 years, maybe a year and a half, maybe 9 months in just one story? Even if it's 600 words, better that you get 5 stories. So that is the whole point. Does that sound better?
Question. So, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. No, if I have a 5 story, then in that case, to pick up 1 or 2, I should go the most important story, which as a unit, or I feel it's okay. This is the one of the most important, my story. I should go with the, importance. That's, you can suggest me?
Yes.
If I have a 5
very
story.
good questions. Yes, that's a very good question to ask. Very good, because it links up to a lot of things. It links up to what Kelly has said again and again, that whether you're talking about an op-ed or a press release, it's good to link up to what is happening in the bigger picture, right? What is happening locally or in the state or nationally or globally, and to try and find some links because it will sell more readily. So what you find important can be pursued in 2 ways. In your own research findings, you might find that, this is something that's most important for various reasons. You may have spent too much time on it. It may really be a very new kind of search piece. It could link in more to the kind of institution you are. It depends on why you find it important. And at the same time, the journalist actually may find something else important. So if you tell your story of the research to the journalist might pick up a point which you never thought was important.
Yeah, that's
right.
Yes, ma'am.
So to be yes, so to be news savvy, when they say that there are people who are very news savvy, you have to know two things. One, what is it in your research that a journalist might like and why, right? You may not want to promote it, right? So you've done some political research. I mean, Sanjay Baru is a very good example, you know, where we've actually got just out of elections, right? Yeah. Now, it's not that the there are good things about the Prime Minister in the book, but the timing is such that all the journalists are bringing up all the bad things about the Prime Minister. And Sanjay Baru is saying time and again in the interview that actually when you read it late, you will realize that this is the best place where a lot of good things have been said about the Prime Minister, right? But obviously that is what, as a writer, as a researcher, he wanted the media to pick up. But because of the timing, the media is picking up completely different stories, right? So timing again matters, right? Time matters. When you say that you're going to say something, which means that if timing means you're linking it up to current affairs, right? So when you're doing your research, when you're finding out what is important, that is what you need to think about. So there are. I'm going to short here because this is a debate where we have to again discuss. But essentially, remember is that you're trying to prioritize. There are different causes. What you might find important or what the journalist might find important, and that is where one needs to have a more nuanced look when we are looking at what is it that we want to go to the media with and how. Yeah?
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just conscious that we have about 20-25 minutes left of the session, so we'll move forward, and I think we'll go over some of those points again as we wrap up in a second. If we look back at the example that's on the screen here of this press release, I would agree very much with the points that were being raised by you guys. I don't think this is a press release. I think it is actually an abstract. It doesn't put a point across very clearly. It uses lots of assumes language. It's not very appealing. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't think I actually get through to reading the last sentence here. I've given up by that point. I don't really care. I don't think it's a particularly good example. Siobhan, if we can move on to the next slide, we can just go over some of the things, some of the components that need to go into a good press release. And I can send around some examples afterwards of kind of templates, if you like, so if you were writing a press release, the kind of layout that you would have there. Some of the stuff that's just come up there, if you're writing a press release, it's really important to be clear, concise, and topical. Topical is really important with the press release. It should tie into a specific event, or it chimes with a new piece of research that's coming out. It's very important. It's important to be clear and concise, so focusing on one or two particular themes in that press release, one or two key messages is very important, just to make sure that you're getting the angle across that you want. Punchy headlines. That press release that we just looked at didn't really have a headline. It didn't really tell me what the piece was going to be about. But having a punchy headline, something that invites me as a reader to go in and and to keep on reading, would really help. Having said that, with punchy headlines, you don't want to be too clever. You just want to spell out exactly what it is that you're trying to tell people. You quite often will see clever rhymes or plays on words. They don't really work in press releases. They might work more for longer pieces that are going to be written, perhaps features, because you've got more time to explain them. Your headline needs to be punchy and clear. What is it that you're telling people about? With dates and contacts, it's important that information that is imparted in the press release about dates and people that can be contacted for more information, it needs to be really clear. When is this press release due to be released? When do you want this information to be told? Sometimes press releases will be sent out way in advance, say 2 or 3 weeks in advance of an event, and it will say embargoed until, and you will say this is the date I want people to know about this information. But you'll be very clear about the date on your press release. If you are sending out a press release, I think somebody posed a question I saw just come up on the messenger about when to send a press release out. You might want to look at sending it out a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. It is fine if you're flagging up an event. You can send something up, say 3 weeks in advance of an event, and then you can send it again a week before the event. It will depend on the publication. If it's a weekly publication or a daily publication, you need to think about that when you're sending out your press release and work out the date to send it. When you're writing the press release, it's really important that the first paragraph tells it all. A press release, again, you'll need to think about the word count. Usually, I would say a press release would be around the kind of 400 words. Think about, in that 400 words, use your opening paragraph, a short punchy paragraph, to really tell the story, to get the message across. Because then if somebody doesn't make it down to the end of the press release, at least they've understood what you're trying to get across. Yeah. We saw earlier when we were talking about op-eds that the word count changed slightly in the UK to in India. Aditi, would you say that 400 words would be about right for a press release in Asia?
Again.
Have we got Aditi there? Oh,
I'm here.
Oh, she's there.
Can you hear me? Can you?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Would you say 400 words would be about right for a press release in Asia, Aditi?
Maximum.
Yeah.
But don't let the words guide the length of the press, please. You know, even if it's 4 paras, and what you're saying in the first para is most important. So if it's even 4 paras, you know, 50 words each, 200 words, 250 words, 300 words, that's fine. Anyway, they're going to pick up only the first 2 paras. I don't think they'll go all the way down. So
Yeah.
don't let the words hinder you. But in terms of maximum, I would say yes, 400 is a very good line to follow. You could even have a 1.5 page press release, depending on how much information you want to give. But the first para, the second para are the most important. First para is the most important. The second para is the second most important.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I would also say that if you can put within your press release perhaps 1, maybe 2 short quotes. Quotes are really good in press releases to sum up something. So you would perhaps get a quote from somebody within your organisation or the researcher. You need to make sure that the quote that you're putting across is really clear, so it follows the same flow as the press release. It's not full of jargon. But it makes the piece much more credible, and it's really, if you're publishing a piece that's been written off the back of a press release, it makes it feel much more readable, much more credible. It's much easier to read if it has a quote in it. But keep the quote, as I say, maybe 1, 2 quotes maximum. Keep them short, keep them punchy. Make sure that you're very clear about who's saying that quote. So you put the person's name in and clearly their job title. You'd be astonished at the number of publications that don't get job titles correct, and actually that's quite important to make sure that the quote is well attributed. If you're writing a press release, with anything that you're submitting to a wider audience, you'd want to make sure that it's well spelt and that the grammar is good. Make sure that it looks professional. As I mentioned before with the op-eds, it's sometimes a really good tip to just read your piece out loud before you submit it anywhere. You'd be astonished if you read anything out loud, you realise the repetition that's in it, perhaps the jargon that's in it. You do notice some of the spelling mistakes and the grammar mistakes that are in there. So you want it to be professional, you want it to be accurate, so it needs to be well spelt, and with good grammar. With anything that you're submitting to a wider audience, you'd want to make sure that it's well spelt and that the grammar is good. With anything that you're submitting to a wider audience, you'd want to make sure that it's well spelt and that the grammar is good. With anything that you're submitting to a wider audience, you'd want to make sure that it's well spelt and that the grammar is good. with photographs, I've added photographs in here. In the UK, it would be quite appropriate to send photographs, if you've got them, good photographs, to accompany a press release. You wouldn't send lots and lots of them because it's the same thing as we said before about clogging up journalists' inboxes or sending attachments that perhaps they won't open. What you can do, and it's quite common practice within the UK, is to write the press release, and at the bottom you can just make it clear that photographs are available on request from, and then give the name or the email address where people can request the images from, so that the journalist or desk editor can contact you for images if they wish. I think, Aditi, I think from our conversations you would say that actually in Asia quite often publications will use their own photographs rather than ones that have been submitted. Is that right?
Newspapers usually have their own departments, and the photographers are not very happy if outside. Mostly the main daily papers have a policy where they want to use their own photos, but it's always a good thing to send in photos. If you're submitting a feature article, then definitely send in a photo. An article.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing you right. What I would advise then is that you know, rather than send it when you send the press release, you could just say that the photographs are available and give a contact name, and then that would cover you. I would stress you only want to ever submit photos if they're of really good quality, because you don't want your organisation to look bad. So it needs to be of a good quality.
Sorry,
and then,
I'm in the middle of doing this webinar.
Oh, you're in the webinar. Sorry, I won't interrupt.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. No, didn't quite catch that. Sorry. Okay. And then finally on our list we have targeted distribution. Before you send it off, it's really important to think about where you want this information to go. And this is something we talked about before. Thinking about who the end audience is will help you to determine which publications you send your press release to. On a practical note, when you're sending your press release, it's important to send one press release to one publication at a time. Don't put lots and lots of people in the to box on your email and send it off. It's much more important to tailor the press release to the publication that it's going to. You've got more chance of them actually using it and contacting you to follow up on that information. And if it's possible, it's good to really do a bit of homework and find out who it needs to go to. Does it need to go to a particular journalist? Does it need to go to a department head? Really target the right person so that it isn't just sitting in someone's inbox and not being looked at. It can be in one organisation that you're sending the same press release but to perhaps 2 or 3 people. And I would suggest if you do that, it's good to just send it individually to those 2 or 3 people. You've got more chance of having a response if it comes back to them. I think we have a question which is around the worst time to write a press release. Is it the last minute? Was that the question that's come in? If that's the case, I would totally agree. If you write a press release, if it's like that, oh, this event's happening, you know, in 2 days' time and we need to send this out quick, let's write a press release, you won't get the information clear, I don't think. It's good to just really think about who the audience is that you want to reach and write it specifically for them. And it may take a little bit of time to get that press release clear and concise, but they're really quite a good kind of cost-effective tool to get information across. And of course, when you end your press release, you must always put a contact name for further information, because perhaps you've missed a point, or perhaps the desk editor might look at it and think, actually, I'd like to follow up on this and supplement this press release with an interview or something bigger. So always put a contact name and email address or number in the press release so that people can find out more information.
Okay, this is Shurit Kelly, and I have a
Hello,
question I have a question about targeting, about knowing whom to send your press release to. Okay, now I have to give you some background here. Very interesting experience at the Institute of Economic Growth some time back. Nobel Prize winning Nobel Prize laureate in economics spoke at the IEG. I added a link to the interview that was published. It's there now. This is James Heckman, and he was talking about early childhood education. That's what he is famous for, and that's what he won the Nobel Prize for. If you see the interview, it's about corruption in the context of the Indian elections. You know that we have elections right now. Voting is going on in a multi-phased format across the country. And corruption is always a big issue here. Gentlemen from Business Standard, our premier business newspaper, spoke with Professor Heckman and asked him a few questions on corruption. And this was obviously part of a series of elections and corruption. And he got something there wrong. I mean, Professor Heckman is known for something called the Heckman equation, which essentially says that the first 7 years of a child's life, they're very important, and investment in those 7 years for the welfare of both the child and society. And he calls it the Heckman correction there, if you look at the byline. Okay, I've been trying to understand what might be there. I was wondering if Kelly can help me on this. The attached question, the question attached to this is, how can I know beforehand who in a room in a newspaper to send release to?
Yeah, it's difficult to find the right person. Sometimes it's not the most obvious person. You can look up, obviously you can look up online quite often and find out who the desk editors are. Quite often the desk editors aren't necessarily the right person to send it to, in my experience. It's quite often that there are copy editors that will pull these together, so it's perhaps somebody who's a bit more junior in the office is quite often a good person to at least talk through the piece with. I would look up with any publication, I would try to find out as much about their readership as their internal organisation. So I'd look them up online to see who are they actually reaching, how is that publication structured, do they have specific desks for specific topics, or are they a much smaller team, because quite often people will, you know, have to double up and perhaps aren't an expert in their field. And I tell you, one of the things, if I was going to bother to send out a press release, I'd phone up and I would talk to people as well. I wouldn't just rely on emails to them. I'd phone the organisations and ask, who do I send them to? And I think it's not easy. It's not like there's a registered directory that you can flick through and find people. You do have to do a bit of research both online, but I'd say I'd always supplement it by phoning the organisation and talking to them and saying, I want to send this, how many people do I, who do I need to send it to? And in some cases it might be more than one person, and it might not always be the most obvious person. It can be, that it is one of the more junior reporters that start out by pulling the piece together, and then it gets checked by the desk editor. Aditi, would you agree with that? Would you have anything to add?
Thank you very much. I'd also like your comments on what might have happened on the Heckman lecture.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it now, actually. I mean, it's an interesting one because it's obviously written as a series of questions. I think sometimes what's happened in these cases is that people hear one thing and they don't check it. As a good journalist, if you're writing a piece, you should really you should check it with people before you publish it. Sometimes time doesn't allow more detailed checking, but certainly if I was putting together a piece where I was, in this case, it looks as though Mr. Heckman's, it's his responses word for word, I'd want that to be checked by him. It says edited excerpts, and I think that's quite interesting because it's in the edit that some of the meaning's been lost, I think, and that, you know, the editing can be very difficult because you can cut out one word or replace one word and then you've changed the whole meaning. So as a journalist, I would, if I was reporting in someone in the first person in that way, I would send it back to be checked. And I'm guessing that didn't happen at the time.
No, that certainly didn't happen. The larger issue perhaps is that he didn't actually cover the talk. The talk was an entirely unrelated issue. That's what really surprises me. It was on early childhood education. And he came in and talked to gentlemen on corruption. So we got our piece, so to speak, but this is hardly the piece that we had expected.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because sometimes, as I say, as a journalist, you will talk to somebody thinking that you're going to cover a particular piece, and then the interview takes a different turn. And sometimes that's intentional. You know, people want to perhaps promote a different, you know, product or a different piece of information. I think as a journalist, you always have to be willing to you know, to change your story, but you know, good journalists should always check and make sure that what they're putting out is factually correct and is a good representation. I think that's probably what's happened there.
Aditi,
okay.
do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just telling Kelly, you know, I was just writing to the thing that it goes back to the point that if media is one of our target audiences, then whether we are formally speaking to media or we are talking to media informally, it is important to stick to the message that we want to give, because we cannot trust the media. The media may go ahead and write anything. And then, you know, there is a higher risk with that, like it happened. You know, the media, the journalists might go and write anything. And there is very little that we can do about it. If we have stuck to our messages, and if then the media has you know, misquoted us, then it is easier to go and say that, well, you know, you need to publish an editor or, you know, do whatever. So I think it goes back to say that there is a code of conduct when you're working with the media, and very often we don't understand that there is this code of conduct. So just like there is the protocol when we are dealing with policymakers, there is a code of conduct when we are working with media persons. So if we can just make a list of do's and don'ts for ourselves based on what we might have heard today and what we might know otherwise and learn from experience, then the risks are far lesser, and the probability of getting in the print what you might want to get in the print would be higher.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to be really clear. I mean, whichever
Yeah, sorry, Kelly. Just before you respond to that, one more thing I wanted to add in terms of who to contact in the media. The best, actually, if you know the reporter, that's fine. But even if you know the reporter, it's always good to send the invite to the head of the department. So if it is an event happening in the city, which relates to city, municipality or department or whatever, then you have to send it to the chief reporter, who handles the city news. But if it is an event happening in the city, it does not relate to the municipality or the local police or things which are under the state assembly, then you have to send it to the chief of bureau and the chief reporter and the chief photographer. So if you send an invite to the heads of these three departments, and you know, if you only have a bureau in your state headquarters and not the city reporting, that's fine, you send it to the bureau chief. Essentially to the bureau chief, to the chief photographer, and to the chief reporter, and you can also send it to the reporter. But it's important to send it to the heads of the departments. And even in a, you know, if it's a small newspaper, you send it to the editor, that's also fine. Because the heads of the departments are the one who actually decide what is finally going to go to the newspaper. And where is it that the reporter, if the reporter has conflicting assignments, what is it that the reporter has to do? The second point is you have to call up and follow up. Without calling up, journalists don't come. And not once, not twice, get their mobile numbers, SMS them, call them up. Just sending a written invite is not enough at all. Thanks.
No, they're really good points, Aditi, really good. Being persistent and really pushing your message across is really important. And I think sometimes it's worth just thinking about, you know, particularly in a news environment, it's very busy, it's very fast-paced. So it's not that you're going to, you know, make a nuisance of yourself. It's just reminding people in a really busy environment, oh yeah, that thing is happening, or that, you know, that it sounds really interesting and we should cover that. That's the point about just repeatedly contacting people, and contacting more than one person in an organisation is yeah, absolutely good practice. Okay. So I think we have a question from the floor. What do you say when the press release is about an event and the photographs will be available after the event? That's an excellent question. So if that's the case, then just make it clear in the press release to say the event is, obviously you would be very clear when the event is taking place, where it's taking place, perhaps how to actually get to the event, if it's is a good thing to include. But you would be very clear to say post-event photographs will be available, and give a contact give contact details for how people could get those pictures. If it's a newspaper that's well staffed and they have photographers on board, really good idea to find out who the photographers are, the head of the pictures desk, and get in touch with them and invite them to come to the event and take their own pictures as well. It goes a long way. If they've sent somebody out to take pictures, they're going to use them. Basically, they'll run with that piece. But if you're sending them after the event, then that's absolutely fine. Just make it clear in the press release that pictures will be coming. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time and that we're running out of time. Siobhan, perhaps we can just move on to the last slide, just as in summary. And I will send the more detailed notes. Sorry, just back one, so I've got that. I will send detailed notes around that Aditi and I have worked on with Siobhan's help, so that you've got some resource material when you come to write your own press releases and op-eds. I just wanted to just take a minute. We've talked a lot about the format of these particular forms of communication, and hopefully that's been useful. Before you even think about producing an op-ed or a press release or an article or any other form of communicating with the media, it's really important to just ask yourself some simple questions in advance about your research. Thinking really clearly, you know, what are the main findings? What is it that's new about the research? Perhaps what's different about the methodology? Really crucial if you're thinking about imparting key messages. What are the policy recommendations that your findings suggest? Why does the research matter? Excuse me. And thinking about, if you're thinking about dealing with the public, with a much bigger audience, think about why your research is meaningful for that ordinary person. How does it fit into perhaps some existing views or sources that are out there? Really, this is before you even write anything. Just really think about what your key message is, because it really helps the journalist to think about what the angle is on the story, and ultimately it really helps you to get your message across. I hope that if you can only remember a couple of things out of our discussion this morning, that you'll take away how important it is to be clear and concise, and to really only think about getting one or two key messages across in your format, but get them across really well. So I hope that really pulls together a lot of information in a short period of time. I wonder briefly if there are any questions that people want to raise at this point. As I say, we will send slides and more detailed information and resources out to you. and we'll send the presentations, and I believe that the webinar is actually being recorded, so we can send that out perhaps for you to re-listen to, or to send it to people that perhaps couldn't participate. Are there any further questions that people would like to raise at this point? I hope it's been useful. Very useful.
Very useful. Very useful.
Good. Good.
I think we need to just get down to practice.
Well, it's funny you should say that. What we were going to suggest, and I think Siobhan will send more detail out, is if you do want to practice writing op-ed pieces or press releases over the coming weeks, and you want to use myself and Aditi as a sounding board, you could send the examples to us, and I'm very happy to work on them and perhaps give some tips of how to tidy them up and make them clearer. I'm sure perhaps Siobhan will pick up on this afterwards, but over the next few weeks it would be really good if you do want to practice in this. You could practice with me and pretend that I'm that desk editor and I'm that journalist, and send material to me, and I'll happily give you detailed feedback on the pieces that you've written. Okay, well, it's been great to hear from you all today. I'm glad it's been useful. As I say, we'll send pieces and details, more detailed information out to you. And if people do want to contact me with examples of their samples, press releases, I'm very happy to have a look at them. Okay, so I think Siobhan's saying that there's a survey coming out too. And that will be sent round. Okay, so the survey response has been sent through by email. If you can take the time to fill them out and to send the details back. Have a quick look. If you haven't received it, Siobhan is online and is happy to take questions. Okay, so I have a question from Susan asking about opinion pieces and do they have to be written by researchers? I would say no. Opinion pieces can be written by researchers. They can be written by many people, anybody in the organisation really, who's passionate about the research and is very clear about the research. With opinion pieces, I think if you can make sure that it's clear why this person has this informed view. So it helps if it's the researcher, because obviously they would have the background information on the research, but the important thing is that the opinion pieces are written by people who are informed, passionate and clear about the point that they want to get across. Okay. Yeah. So I think what we're seeing is that, within an organisation there's a variety of people that can author these pieces. It's good to work as a team and get the comms people in your organisation to look over the pieces and tidy them up. If anyone does want to use me for practice, and want to send examples of press releases and op-ed pieces, then please do send them through. Siobhan will send out the details to you. But thank you all for this morning. Really useful. Thanks for bearing with me on the technology side. And yeah, good to speak to you all.
Thank you all too.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you. It's good experience and learning.
So I don't suppose we have time for a last question, do we?
I'm still here. I can always ask.
There are two key assumptions to this webinar. So the scenario I work in is that we're essentially academic researchers, and we policy uptake or influence of the work we do. We do academic research, gets picked up. If it does find some influence, well, that's that. But otherwise, we're not terribly concerned. In this scenario, how would you recommend we communicate our research, and what do you think would be important for us to do? I'm not sure if these are relevant questions to this webinar. The questions are at the top of my mind, and I thought I'd run them past you.
Sorry, I missed the beginning bit when you were just explaining a little bit about your organisation. So you're asking what's the best format to use, but I missed the beginning bit when you were saying the type of information that you work on.
Yeah, so I'll just say that again. We are a research institute, but we're not exactly a think tank in the sense that it's not really a mandate to influence policy. If we do influence policy, if our research does influence policy, well, we're happy, of course, but right now our focus is on academic research. We do research because we want to do that research because it's important to us, because we want to. Essentially, that's where it starts and that's where it ends. So if it gets taken up in the media, if it does find some implication in government policy, that's a corollary, that's a side benefit, so to speak. In that scenario, if you go back to the assumptions for this webinar, the assumptions of communication, where would we fit in? How would we communicate? What do you recommend?
Okay, understand it. Aditi, I think you've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah. See, we have to be very clear that media is only one tool for communication. For academic institutions, we may use, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Academic institutions can use media for some part of research, something that fits in with bigger picture, something that's happening, something that will engage public imagination. So maybe just a small part of the research. So most of the research can still go into peer-reviewed journals. The idea of getting into media is only to tell the world that listen to influence the policy, but often pick up information from various sources to arrive at the decision. And so if you've got something which could make a difference to the welfare of the people where you stay, then it would be good if you could use media for maybe, just one small bit of your research outputs. So for instance, if you look at JNU professors for that matter, or even IIT professors, they're all academics. They guide PhD students. But for whatever little they might come out from their work, they engage through the media on large policy discussions. The idea is, in an opinion piece for that matter, is that your opinion counts because there is some experience behind that opinion, and media space is one space that you can begin to, right?
I think that's a good point, Aditi. I think we're looking at the media just as one channel of communication. It may not be the most appropriate one. It's thinking about where you want your information to go. It can still be that actually it's to the research community, so it is a peer-reviewed journal, or maybe it is actually more face-to-face discussion and round-table discussions with specific individuals. It's really taking a step back and thinking about your communication strategy, and think about who you want to reach, and choosing the different routes, if you like, to those people. So I think the media is just one route, basically, but it's a good, solid route if you want to talk to the public and to the wider audience. I do hope that helps to answer the question. I'm very happy if you have questions, we can take them offline and on email directly, if that's more appropriate. Okay. Well, I thank you for your time this morning. The materials will be sent out, and very available to take questions directly, or to look at pieces if you want to practice writing pieces, and can give some more detailed feedback on those. Okay. Well, thanks very much, everybody. Have a very good day.